Hi everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be talking about the 8.16 PBE and talking about the current meta as well. If you'd like to find a copy of this Google Doc, you can find that in the description. I'll also have timestamps so you can jump around to your favorite parts if you don't have time to watch the whole video. As always, I just like to remind people that this is just PBE, that's public beta environment if you're newer to the games. This is where they test out things for what they're going to do on the next patch. So a lot of times what will show up in these PBE notes, a lot of it will actually end up in the next patch, but some of it won't. So be sure to watch the actual patch notes when the new patch comes out so that you can get the 100% accurate analysis of what's going on. I know there are some other YouTubers out there that will claim new and broken and patch whatever the next patch is, and they'll release that 3 or 4 days beforehand. They don't get early access to the patch notes. They're basing it strictly on what's the PBE, and they're doing that so they can try to get the scoop on other people, right? So they can be the first person to post the video, even if it's not the most accurate video. So I try to sort of meet in the middle and be upfront and say, look, this is PBE. I do it every other week when there's not a patch, just sort of halfway through. You can see how the meta is developing and what I think might be happening in the future. And then I do a real patch notes video, usually on Tuesdays, the afternoon that the patch notes come out. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so first up, we'll talk just really briefly about the meta. Not that much has changed, I don't think, since what I predicted on the patch notes in the previous PBE. I think it's going in the direction that I predicted. And then we'll go into the PBE itself and talk about that. Okay, so just real quickly, 80 carry champs are getting better. They never really went away. People were just all outraged about everything. But some of these changes did definitely help some of the 80 carries. And so we've got a pretty diverse pool. This is one of the most diverse pools of 80 carries that we've had in a while. So if you look at win rates here, you've still got Misfortune is really high up on the list. So, I was a little worried in the patch notes that she might fall a little too much because a lot of the other crit champions would be better, but she's still really, really good. You can build her with Dark Harvest or a traditional, like a Comet type of build. I think Dark Harvest is actually pretty good. I talked about that on my most recent, I think it was the most recent 80 carry tier list, or maybe it was the one last patch. But she's still going to be really strong. Great early game, great team fighting. The fact that crowd control and tanks are coming back into play is actually really nice for her, which seems a little counterintuitive because she's not very good at breaking tanks herself, but she really likes team fights, and tanks often encourage people to team fight because they have a lot of crowd control. They have initiate, engage typically, and that's what she wants. She wants people to be grouped up and held in place so she can channel her ult later in the game. She does not like assassins. She does not like skirmishing. And tanks are very good against assassins. So it's not necessarily that she's good against tanks. It's good that it's that she's pretty good in a meta that's defined by team fight tanks, right? And she has a very strong early game as well. And they just nerfed the biscuits, or not biscuits, but the potions on this patch. So people have a lot less sustain to get through her harassment early. So that has allowed her to stay on top, even though she didn't benefit from the crit changes, because she's still going to get, Dustblade, Ghostblade, Cleaver a lot of the time. Okay, and then Jinx came up. Jinx is someone that's been creeping up for a while, and I did predict that she would have a really huge rise on this patch, and she has. She's gone up about 2%, and she's very popular as well. The reason for this is you can just go Stormrazor Hurricane, and the Stormrazor makes sure that each one of your rockets also crits on that first hit. Then you can go Infinity Edge after that. And so she has a really smooth build path now, and the fact that they lower that cost on Stormrazor is really good for her. I mean, she comes online a lot faster. So she's the best hyper carry right now, I think, and with champions like Caitlyn still not being very strong on this patch, champions like Kog'Maw not being very strong, then she's one of the better ones. She also has pretty decent early game. It's not amazing, but it's okay because her rockets do allow you to push pretty well if you want to. And then Chompers is a very good combination with other crowd control. So if Leona engages on someone, you throw Chompers on them. She does have that follow-up chain CC. So she doesn't have, the most damage in the world early on, but it's pretty decent. And they have buffed her Q several times. So Zap actually does some okay damage. Or not her Q, but whatever Zap is. I think it's her W. Does some pretty decent damage as well. So I think Jinx is in a great spot. The only thing is you have to make sure that you have a competent support. So if you're going to pick Jinx, you need to really do your research. Think about it, look on that op.gg, make sure it's not an auto-filled support playing, Lux or Ashe or something like that, right? Make sure that you have a good support with you. And kind of the rise of enchanters, the rise of, Nami, Sona, Janna coming back into the meta bode very, very well for Jinx. And she's really good at shredding tanks. So she's pretty good at AoE fighting. She doesn't have quite as much burst, like AoE damage, as Miss Fortune does with her ult, but she has much higher single target damage and pretty respectable AoE damage with the rockets plus Hurricane. So I think she's positioned very well if you can get some peel, if they don't have a lot of assassins. If, you know, they have a Talon and you have an auto-filled support that's not going to peel for you, that's going to be a problem. But in a lot of situations, she's going to be pretty strong. Draven's still super good. Very high win rate, very oppressive early on. He's probably the most aggro, most likely to get kills in the laning phase. If he does get some kills, he snowballs really hard off of it. If he doesn't get kills, it can be a little rough later on. He doesn't have as much utility as some of these other picks out there. Like, he doesn't have Miss Fortune's ult. He doesn't have rockets plus Hurricane that Jinx has. He's shorter range than Jinx. But he's still very strong if you get ahead with him early. So yeah, I'm not going to go down. I have an entire 80 carry tier list if you want to check it out. But the moral of the story is that 80 carries are doing very well, and there's a good diversity of 80 carries. Everything from casters like Miss Fortune to hyper carries like Jinx and Twitch being up there to sort of bully, early game bullies with Draven. I guess Miss Fortune, you know, falls into that as well. And then Jen is pretty far up there. Even Sivir's starting to creep back in a little bit. Not a very high play rate or representation, but as far as like just AoE, wave clear, team fight initiate type of support, or 80 carry rather. You have that. So, I mean, you have a pretty good representation of every type of 80 carry being pretty strong. You know, at least having one or two champs that are over 52% as far as like early game caster, bully, late game scaler, you know, pusher. We've got it all in there. So, we still aren't seeing a lot of good use out of champions like Caitlyn. She's getting closer to 50%, and the on-hit champs are still suffering, so... you know, like on-hit Varus, Kog'Maw, Kai'Sa. That's kind of one class of champ that isn't super highly represented. Although Kai'Sa's still around 51%. I think people are going away from that on-hit build. But everything else is doing pretty well. So, I think 80 carries moving in a good direction. Enchanters are still getting a lot stronger. As I predicted, I know that we had a couple of people in the chat saying that Enchanters would not be good on this patch. I disagreed with that, and that has been true. So, a lot of reason for this is, you know, when they nerf things like potions, other champions that have a heal are going to benefit from that because they have a heal. And, you know, champions that don't have a heal do not have as much sustain without those potions. So, I think that, like, Nami is still super strong. Sona is actually creeping up there quite a bit. So both of these are very good, very consistent. Sona's not seeing a ton of play, but she's actually really good into Nami in a lot of situations because she's going to outscale her, and her itemization with like Athene's and Ardent Censer is very strong. So I think that she's good. And you're still seeing a representation of other champs again. Once again, similar to 80 carries, we have kind of the initiate tanks with Blitzcrank. You have some AP champions like Zyra. I still think that Fiddlesticks is amazing, even though his win rate has dropped. I think he's still very, very strong. And then Zyra's still up there doing well. Zillion's always kind of floating around like 51, 52% with a low play rate. Mostly one trick's playing him, but he could be good. And then some of the tanks like Alistar are coming back in. Is she sad? Champions like Alistar are starting to creep back in a little bit just because he does have that sustaining lane. He does have initiate. And Rakan has taken a bit of a beating over the last couple of patches. I still think that he's good, but he's definitely playing him. I've noticed it's definitely a lot harder than it was. You know, he does lose a lot by losing that potion because he is pretty weak in the lane unless you get a gank or unless you have severe lane dominance, like you have a Draven, they have an Ezreal or something. And he's not as good against like hard CC type of champs, which are starting to come back in a little bit more with champions like Alistar, Fiddle. Like, Fiddle's very good against him. Janna is actually pretty good against him, too, because you can just blow him back and you just outscale him a lot of the time. So, Rakan's got it a little bit tougher than he had. A little bit tougher than I anticipated with the loss of the potions. The mana nerf doesn't matter that much, but you can feel it if you stay in lane for quite a while. The mana nerf can definitely add up. So, he is getting nerfed more next patch. We'll talk about that in the patch notes here in just a second, but I think that he's definitely fallen down a little bit, and because he has gone down, then I think Alistar goes up a little bit. Because Rakan has almost always been better than Alistar, I think, in solo queue, at least almost since he came out, but he's been nerfed so many times. Alistar does have much better all-in potential early. He has way more damage off of his, you know, WQ combo, and then you chain it together with your stun with your E. That can do quite a bit of damage early on, and with Aftershock. So I think that Alistar is definitely gaining, and Alistar obviously is much tankier, and he has that innate sustain with his passive Roar. And he's going to have higher just base stats, you know, higher armor, higher health regen, all that kind of stuff. And tank itemization is like, it's still a little bit behind Enchanters, but it's not as behind as it was in the past, because they've nerfed a lot of the plus healing and shielding stat. So, you know, being able to go things early like a Zeke's or like a Knight's Vow is not as bad as it was when compared to Enchanters rushing something like Ardent Censer or Redemption. It's not quite at parity. I think the Enchanters still have better itemization, but it's not as bad as it once was. So I think that bodes well for some tank champs like Alistar. So it's pretty well represented, I think, as far as tanks, enchanters, and AP champs all being viable right now. So I think that's a pretty good balance as well. So I think that the meta overall is great right now. I think there are a lot of champions that are viable. There are not that many champions that feel super oppressive, that are almost impossible to deal with. So I think the meta is pretty good. I hope they don't tinker with it too much. They could dial down the assassins in the mid lane especially a little bit, like knock down the Talon, the Fizz, that type of stuff just a little bit. But I think overall it's pretty good. So tanks are still like slightly on the... Tanks and other roles like jungle and top still are slightly on the weak side in solo queue. They're getting very strong in pro play though, so it's very difficult to balance both of those. But I think it's relatively even, with maybe a slight nerf to assassins and a slight buff to some of the tanks would probably be a good thing. The funneling plus smite mid has been dead on this patch, as I predicted. Just nobody does that anymore. But I think that it might come back in pro play once they start playing on 8.15 because of the jungle changes that I talked about in the patch notes. So stay tuned for that. Once pros start playing on it, you might see some of the ways that I talked about where people could get around that. Rageblade plus Conquer is still a thing that's not good. So that's why, yeah, Kai'Sa, Varus, Kog'Maw, that does bode well for tanks. Although champions like Jinx, champions like Vayne can still take down tanks pretty fast. It's not... They don't just melt through them as fast as something like a Kog'Maw or a Kai'Sa do. But I think that's pretty good. A lot of the AP champs in the bottom lane are these on-hit champs, though. So like the Varus, like the Kai'Sa. So if you get overloaded on AD, you can't get anything AP in the bot lane slot as much. I mean, you can, but like Swain and Vlad have fallen off of bot lane quite a bit. Kai'Sa is not as good as she was, although she's okay. But a lot of people aren't building her AP anymore. And then Varus has some problems. Cog has problems. Corki just doesn't really exist anymore. So yeah, so that means there's a higher risk of overloading on AD, which means that tanks could, you know, benefit quite a lot from that. So, you know, if you have a Talon middle and you've got, you know, Jinx bottom, and the enemy team has a Mundo and just stacks all armor, you know, it could be problematic. So that's something to keep an eye on for sure. But I think that for that reason, Vayne might start coming back in a little bit if tanks come back over the next patch or two, especially if it gets easier in the laning phase, which we'll talk about in a second with the proposed Airy and Electrocute nerfs. But yeah, that's just something to keep in mind, that tanks might definitely come back because Rageblade's less popular, AP bottom's less popular, so you can stack all armor, and then Conquer is less popular as well. Okay, so the three things I've been saying that need nerfs the most, I said this last patch, and they delivered on almost all of this. So they nerfed Fiddle, they nerfed Morgana, so more got mana cost nerfs. And people are going more towards a sustained damage model rather than just CC plus Assassins. I still think that Morg needs a little bit more of a nerf. I don't think she's overpowered necessarily. I just think that she's really frustrating to play against. And so I guess just rebalancing her stuff to where she doesn't have a 3-second bind anymore and they give her more power in her W or her ult. But yeah, so Morg is under control, I think. What's her win rate? Yeah, it's like 50%. I mean, she's not, but she has a 41% ban rate. And I mean, that just kind of speaks to, like, she's statistically not insanely powerful, but at the same time, she is very frustrating. I'm pretty sure she's the most banned champ. Probably her than Fiddle, right? Her than Pyke than Fiddle. Yeah. So, like, Fiddle and Morg are just very frustrating to play against. Fiddlesticks did take a bit of a hit, stat-wise. I guess the mana cost did add up. I feel like after playing a lot of Fiddle, people just must not be managing his mana properly because he still feels really strong to me. the enemy team not having as many potions early on helps Fiddle a lot on the support side, and then nothing else really got changed about him. He still has great initiate, especially in the wake of like Rakan. Like Fiddle is good against Rakan, but Fiddle's also a really good just engage champ if you can get good vision control later. So if Rakan is kind of falling a little bit in terms of engage, then that creates a space for other engaged champions, and I think Fiddlestick's a pretty decent one. Especially like I mentioned before, in the wake of like not having an AP option from the AD carry position as much, because you know, Cog, Kaisa, stuff like that is not as strong, then having a good AP option on your team like Fiddlesticks can keep the enemy team honest and make sure they don't stack all armor. Because AP is not super popular in the jungle right now. Taliyah got nerfed a lot. She's still good, but you're seeing a lot more like Kindred, Graves, things like that. And then top lane, of course, AP is rare. And then mid lane, you still get decent AP, but sometimes you get AD. And even if it's only like just AP in the mid lane and that's it, and that person doesn't do well, then the stacking armor strat could still be really strong. So I think Fiddlesticks is nice for team compositions right now. But yeah, I still think that he and Morg could use probably a little bit more nerfs, honestly. And then after Electrocute, and it's really funny because the way that I said they should nerf it is almost literally what they're proposing to do on the next patch. And I've been calling for this for like 3 patches. So they're taking the AD ratio down. I think they're taking it to 40%. But they're taking the base damage down to 30 to 190, which effectively is pretty much the same thing. If they have 100 AD, bonus AD, then it's going to be the exact same effect. But if they have more than like 200 bonus AD, then they're going to retain a little bit more damage. But they did do some compensatory buffs to make up for that. So we'll talk about that in just a second. And finally, I still think these are good opportunities for buffs. We'll see if they ever take me up on this. I would like to see Frozen Heart. I just would like to see some items just made for support tanks that just are not as good. I would still like to see them restructure the support role to where you have to have an upgraded support item to buy certain other items, right? Kind of like the jungle items, so that things don't get poached and it's a lot easier to balance support tanks. Because support tanks just can't ever really have super awesome itemization, or other roles are just going to ruin it for them. So, you know, I've been talking about, I think they should take Frozen Heart down, you know, take it down 500 gold, minus 20 or minus 200 mana on it, minus 10% CDR, and then make the active have a cooldown to where it cripples people for so long but has a certain cooldown on it, instead of permanently doing that. I think that would be more fun. That would be a better balance, and that would make it more viable as just a great sort of team-wide buff against auto-attack champions. So I think that would be solid. Locket, I think they should position. They should put CDR on it and then knock out a little bit of armor and give it some more magic resist and just position it and say, look, you really only want this if they have a lot of magic damage on their team, right? So you're losing a lot of the armor. I think that would help balance the item out. The 10% CDR would really help with supports, because it just feels really bad when you have to buy that item as support because it doesn't have the 10% CDR on it. And supports rely so heavily on their crowd control to peel and initiate and do what they need to do as a support, because they don't have really high like damage stats, or like sometimes they have high shielding stats, but a lot of like what really characterizes some of the best supports over time are their ability to like crowd control and to use their, you know, abilities effectively, right? And so having that 10% CDR is probably more important for supports than almost any other role, just because they don't have the raw stats. Like, they have to rely on their utility because they don't get as much gold. And then I still think they should switch Presence of Mind with Taste of Blood. I think Presence of Mind just doesn't make any sense in the precision tree. And like adding another lifesteal option in that tree would be very helpful, especially for champions like you know, Vayne or Twitch that have a tough laning phase. Being able to have something to compete with Triumph there that gives a bit more healing, I think would be really nice. And on the flip side, having Presence of Mind in the Domination tree would be super helpful, because then that would allow you to have a build where you could focus on like maximum ultimate uptime, you know, because then you could go Ultimate Hunter plus Presence of Mind and really devote a lot towards having your ult up more. And I think that would be a really cool balance idea, especially if Domination has a bunch of other weaker runes, which they kind of do. They're nerfing domination a lot on the next patch. So I think having that be a viable option would be really cool. So then you could see champs that can make plays and do interesting things like Rakan, for example. They might lose out on some stuff by not taking, sorcery or resolve as their primary, or they could get that as their secondary. Then they would be giving up, resolve, or they would be giving up stopwatch or whatever. I just think it would be a really cool thing to have that. I mean, it could potentially be overpowered on some champs to have that much, like, cooldown reduction on an ultimate, but I think it'd be interesting to try. And then CZ Rot Portal, they just need to either change this item or just remove it from the game. It's just a huge noob trap item. It's so bad, and I see so many champions like Yorick or Cinch or whatever getting this item. It's just terrible. It just does not clear waves. It does not take towers quickly at all. It's just a waste of space. So how I think they should deal with this is I think that they should lower the cost by 500, make it 40 armor, 40 magic resist to compensate for that, 60-second cooldown so you could actually use it more often, only 3 HP on the little thing so people could actually kill it faster if they got out on it, does not interact with minions, so it will not wave clear, you cannot use it defensively to stall out a game. That's part of why it was nerfed so much near the end of Season 6, I think, and that's when I bought it a lot, when it was really awesome. When the channel was pretty new and not a lot of people knew about it, but it pushed minion waves so hard that you could put it and have it split push in a side lane. And I think that's the problem from a pro perspective, and that's what we saw with Banner of Command, is if something has too much minion push, it can exert too much macro pressure. But I think having an item where it's lower stats, so you really don't want to get it if you're a laner, because 40-40 is pretty low on the stat sheet. I mean, they could lower it even more. They could make it 35-35 and give it 10% CDR to further define it as a support item. But having something that can help you siege when you're sitting there babysitting it, I think is really helpful. That has counterplay, where people can actually come out on it and kill it, but it can help you siege against things like Anivia or Ziggs or whatever, just to close out the game. I think that would be really helpful. So I would say just does not interact with minions at all. The little monsters do not attack minions. Minions do not attack the monsters. It just runs straight past them and just goes straight to the tower. That's what I think should happen. And so that way it can't push side lanes at all. It's only if you're pretty close to the tower, it can apply some pressure to a tower if it's placed within like 1,000 range or something of a tower. Right? And then I think if no champion is within so much range, then it should deactivate. So you shouldn't be able to just drop it and run away. Like, you have to stay there with it and babysit it. So I think it should be a siege helper, but not used as a sixth person to apply macro pressure on your team. So I think that's a really cool option to have a siege item like that. But, I never really thought that Banner or the old ZZ were that bad because you were giving up so much in terms of team fight as a utility support. So when I used to get this on, like, Janna or something back in Season 6, you couldn't really, like, you wouldn't have redemption early on if you rushed this, or you wouldn't be able to get Locket early on, and that was a really big opportunity cost. But since redemption and Locket have been nerfed, maybe they think that that's too difficult. But I would like to see an item like this exist in the game. I just feel like some kind of like siege helper item, but I understand why it's difficult for Riot to implement a macro item because of pro play. And because people are so savvy about it. Pros almost never got the old ZZ Rot Portal, even though it was super strong back then. I think people just didn't respect macro as much in Season 6. But anyways, okay, let's go ahead and hop into the actual notes here. So I just wanted to keep you up to date on the meta just a little bit. So it's kind of going according to plan. I think the biggest sleeper that's creeping back up is Janna, that a lot of people aren't paying attention to. Very good with Jinx, very good with against Fiddlesticks and a couple other options. Decent against Nami. Has a hard time against Sona, but it just depends on how high scaling your team is. But it's starting to become whoever has the higher scaling AD carry or just team comp in general. If you just pick an enchanter that scales really well too, then you can kind of take over late game. Okay, so they have changed several things on the PBE. Even just today, they changed some stuff. So they are nerfing Aatrox into the ground, it seems. Like, this is a really hard nerf, so he's not going to sustain nearly as much in the lane. And, like, when you first learn the ability, you only have one charge. So I guess that's for, like, so that he doesn't take over for like a level 2 all-in or something. I'm not exactly sure about his trading patterns. But this I don't think is a huge deal. This right here is a pretty big deal, though. You're healing for a lot less, which I guess is fair. He probably has like almost infinite sustain in lane. But I really don't think he's that much of a problem. Surely he's picked, right? I mean, I don't even see him being picked in pro play. At least so far this week among all of these picks. I mean, okay, so maybe he's just banned like literally every single game. That might be why he's never played. I guess he's played twice middle. Okay, so that's fair. But yeah, I guess that's primarily for pro play nerf then, since he's been banned that many times. But at least in solo queue, it doesn't feel like he's that oppressive to me anyways. Like when I play against him, even if he's doing well in the game, it's like I feel like he can be dealt with. Like he's good. I mean, he's like a 51% win rate. I don't know. I feel like this is a really, really harsh nerf for that, but that's how it's going down. And I feel like this is really, like, both of these combined are just huge. Like 20 extra seconds on the ult. I hate changing ultimate timers like that much. Like things that are over like 140 are just kind of ridiculous, because like in pro play, I think people just wait until that ultimate's up. They just communicate and they just stall. I mean, the other team has chances to pressure and get vision and contest objectives, I guess. I don't know. I'm always a proponent of just lowering the power on the ult itself, but allow people to cast it more, because I think people like casting abilities. It's fun. It's interesting. Especially things that are so iconic for their kit. Like, he really doesn't function if he doesn't have his ult. So, I would say just lower, like, the damage on his ult or something and just keep it at 140, but we'll see what they do. So, anyways, yeah, pretty big nerf to Aatrox. Amumu, I don't think this is going to matter. So, the physical reduction is equal to 3% of his bonus armor and magic resist. So if you have 100 bonus armor, 100 bonus magic resist, he gets 6 extra damage blocks. That'd be 16 reduced physical damage. I assume that applies after armor. So maybe that's okay. If you get like hit for 100 and you have 100 armor, that would reduce it to 50 damage and then reduce by 16 down to 34. So maybe that's a lot better than I think, but the big problem with Amumu is his early game is awful. It's absolutely terrible. He has to get blue buff. He has a super predictable path in the jungle most of the time. His ganks are terrible early on. You know, but he has like decent scaling later on into the game. I mean, let's look him up here. Like, he has some okay AP ratios, not that I would advocate building AP on him. And, like, he has a really high-impact ult if you can stick to people. Okay, we're not going to get the stats. But, you know, he has a really high-impact ult if you can stick to people. The problem is it's just, like, super easy to kite him. His crowd control is fairly limited compared to other, you know, tanky type of junglers like a Sejuani. I just think that he's really outdated. And I think it's on a really long cooldown. Isn't it like 150 seconds, 140 seconds? It's on a long cooldown on that ult, so I don't think this is going to change it. I think he's still going to be a pretty weak jungler overall. They need to change his wave clear and give him, like, at least some wave clear early on. Like, make his W do extra damage to minions or monsters, or his E, or just something. Do extra damage to monsters, I think is the best way to at least make him relevant, so he can at least get to 6. It's like, okay, he's worthless until 6, but maybe kind of like Master Yi or something, he can at least get there faster. Okay, Fizz, nerfing him down. He does have a high win rate and high play rate. I haven't seen him a lot in solo queue, but I do think he probably is the strongest mage, so he deserves to be nerfed a little bit here. Knocking down the ratio, basically 15% on his W, and then 10% on his ult. I think that's fair. It's still going to be a lot stronger than it was, especially on the point-blank ult, which I think is one of the most dangerous things to give him, where he can just E right on top of you and just fish you in the face, so it's no longer a skill shot, really. Still giving a 0.8 ratio on that is going to be pretty strong. So, but this in conjunction with Electrocute and the sudden impact nerfs, which we'll talk about in a second, are probably enough to bring him really far into line. So they don't want to nerf him too much, because like the rune nerfs are going to affect him pretty heavily. So I think that's probably fair. That's a good amount. Hecarim is interesting. he doesn't build a lot of AD typically. I mean, I guess they're trying to push people to build more damage on champs, like to build damage if you want damage, which I think overall is a pretty good thing. It kind of tempts people to do bad builds though, like when they buffed like Shyvana's AP ratio and everybody was playing AP Shyvana or AP Zac. It's like, it's kind of there just as a noob trap a lot of the time. I guess just to tempt people to build them in like weird ways. But I mean, I guess it does allow more creativity without affecting their primary builds, but it's just kind of like smoke and mirrors, I think, sometimes. So that's kind of how I feel this is. Now, this is total AD, though, I think, on his Q, and not bonus AD. So that's pretty decent. And then the base damage is increased at higher levels by 20, which is pretty substantial. So, you know, if you want to go Warrior Hecarim, that could be good. Like, typically, he historically has gone Cinderholt, Triforce, and then some other tank item. You know, maybe he might do Asterix, or he could do like a Spirit Visage, or Dead Man's Plate gives him a lot of extra movement speed. I don't really know what he's going to get here, but if he wants to go Warrior, that might be okay. I just feel like he doesn't have good AD ratios, though. Enough to get Warrior. Like, I still feel like you're going to get Cinderhulk, and if that's the case, I just don't think that it is total AD, so once again, he will benefit off of his base stats. And of course, the wiki doesn't want to work today. Can I just like refresh it 50 times and get it to work? Sometimes that works. It feels like trying to get this page to work is like trying to get an old like Nintendo cartridge to work. You just kind of blow on it, tap it, you know, just do random stuff to it, and occasionally it works. But anyways, we'll see. I don't think this is gonna like catapult him back into the meta, but we'll see. Like, he is good with Predator. You know, he's not going to be hit by the Electrocute nerf like some of the other champs will be, so maybe the runes shuffling around might help him a little bit. Like, he's very good when he gets the 3 items. It's just like early on, he can get muscled out by some of the other champs, so we'll see if that changes. I don't think this is going to be massive, but it definitely helps a little bit. What's his win rate? I feel like he's probably like 50%, right? Where did he go? Did I miss him? Okay, there he is. Yeah, he's about 50%. So it's not like he's terrible. I think he's better than people suspect. People just don't play him very much. But I could see him being okay after this. I don't know if he'll be top tier, but I think that definitely helps. Now, they proposed a lot of changes for Leona. It looks like they've taken a lot of that back. So now they're just basically giving her a buff on her W. They had thought about nerfing the damage on her W and her E, but this is just a straight buff. That's pretty good. That's a way to combat enchanters. She is good early on against things like Sona, Nami, Janna, so Rakan. So, I don't mind Leona getting a few buffs. She can be very oppressive at, like, gold minus. But she is very vulnerable. She's a really hard, like, lane domination champion that's really bad if she falls behind. So, it's like a super risky pick. You know, if you get a 2-on-2 lane, if the jungler never comes down and you have Draven Leona, you know, against something like Jinx, Janna, like, you can probably destroy them in lane. But if you try to go in for that gank without proper vision, or you try to go in for that engage and then the jungler ganks you, it's really bad. She does not have a reverse gear. It's one way with Leona. So I think champions like that should be very powerful in their best case scenarios to compensate for how bad they are in the worst case scenarios if they get camped. So I'm okay with that. I like that. Even though I do think that she could be pretty oppressive if they buff her too much. I don't think that's too far over the line, though. Nautilus, this higher base shield by 15, but they're lowering the HP scaling by 4% of max HP. So if you have like 2,000 max HP, it's like 80, right? Yeah, it's not bonus HP, it's max HP. %9% is max. Yeah, so I feel like this is a nerf? Because that's 80. I mean, so they're giving you 15, but it's like, even if your maximum health is like, 1,000, that's going to be 40. If your maximum health is 500, it's still a nerf. So, like, level 1. If you take this at level 1. I mean, I guess that the base is higher, but, like, by the time you get to level 9, this is 85 versus 100. I feel like that's a pretty massive nerf. Pretty massive nerf to how big the shield is. Now, in exchange for that, the cooldown is lowered to 12 at all ranks, so that's helpful, but the duration is lowered as well. I don't know if that matters necessarily too much. I mean, it's not going to matter. I still think that Nautilus has a lot of problems. I mean, the big issue is he's still squishier than a lot of the other mainstream tanks, and his mana costs are too high on his E. You know, like, he needs to be able to wave clear and push. Like, they really don't want top Nautilus to come back, I think, which I don't know why not. Like, I don't understand why Nautilus is seen to be more threatening than something like Ornn as far as, like, game balance goes. Or, like, these other tank tops that just, like, Malachi, that just, like, took over for a long time. Nautilus was never really, like, insanely powerful. Like, back in Season 5 or something, he was picked a lot top lane, but I don't know. I think they're being unfairly cautious or just, like, unreasonably cautious with Nautilus. Just give him his E back. Like, he doesn't have any percentage health damage that he deals. And that's, like, the hallmark of most contemporary tanks. When you think about, like, Ornn doing that percentage damage, or, like, Mundo doing percentage damage, he doesn't have that. All he has is flat damage. He has a lot of CC, but I don't know. I think that they need to just lower the mana cost on his E, just drop it by 10, revert it back to what it used to be, and that would certainly help him out a lot. I don't think that would bring him too far over the line. So, especially now that you have so many hook champs that are pretty decent, like you've got Pyke, Blitz, Thresh, like there's so many alternative options to Nautilus that, I don't know. I liked Nautilus a lot. I played him a lot in Season 6. He's been kind of in the gutter for a long time now, I think. I mean, he's not that far in the gutter, I guess. Let's see, what top lane? Yeah, I mean, he's got like a 50% win rate top lane. I know that we have some people, I think it's like 8ball really likes trying to play Nautilus as support. He's okay. I mean, he's like 50% in all categories, so I guess he doesn't need that much help, but anyways, I'd like to see him get a bit more than that. I think he has a very interesting and cool kit. Okay. Then they are lowering the MR on Orianna, lowering the AD per level on Quinn. That's not going to matter on Quinn. Orianna, this might make a difference. We'll see. This is primarily for pro play. That's weird, because that's one of the first times they've lowered anybody's base MR, I think, below the 30 normal amount. So that's an interesting Pandora's box they're opening there. Rammus, it's probably not going to matter. Bonus armor. They are giving him a little bit more bonus armor and magic resist. You know, like 10% more bonus armor, magic resist. He's okay. There's just quite a lot of counterplay to him. I think. I mean, I don't know. Like, he could be good against something like a Sona, maybe. Possibly Nami if you can dodge her bubble. I think he's a little slow in the jungle, but, you know, if Cinderholt comes back, like if they nerf the jungle stuff a lot, then, you know, maybe he gets a little bit better. We'll see. Sion, not going to matter. Tahm Kench, this is a massive nerf to Tahm Kench. This is primarily for pro play, because Tahm doesn't have a very good win rate in solo queue. It's probably among the lowest. It's like 48%. But, like, the problem with Tahm Kench, and I say this as someone, my most played champ in Season 6 was Tahm Kench. I played him a decent amount in Season 7, and even an okay amount in Season 8, is that he's just very, he's very anti-fun. As he gets people, his ability to proactively get people out of crowd control is just too strong. Like, that's the whole thing that I think makes him oppressive. I mean, if we look at the picks, like, he's the most picked support right now with a really high win rate. And I don't know how his win rate is. It's only like 50% overall. But the problem is he starves out so many other options. Like, you just can't really play, or it makes it a lot more difficult to play hard engaged champs when Tahm Kench is in the game. Like, he just completely shuts down playmakers like Thresh, Leona, A lot of champs like that, and that's just not as much fun to watch in pro play. You know, just sitting there, just watching people farm off forever. And then Tahm Kench just being able to save people. I mean, it's similar to like Janna, but Janna can be caught and killed. Tahm Kench is so tanky that it's tough. Now, what they're doing to him is just, I think, going to completely gut him. I mean, maybe I'm overstating that, but they are changing his cooldown. If you eat an ally, it goes to 28 seconds. Level 1. Goes down to 16, but still, like, that's 6 extra seconds when you max this out. And usually this is what you'll max by level 9 or 10, depending on how many points in Tongue Lash you get. They did lower the cost a little bit, but, you know, they're trying to encourage you to eat enemies, because it's only half the cast if you eat an enemy. So I don't know. I mean, how often do you need to eat people in a fight to make him effective? Sometimes just eating them once is fine. But I'm telling you, like, 6 extra seconds before you can eat someone again is kind of rough. So, we'll see. Now, the mana cost being lowered is interesting because, and especially for, like, top lane Tahm Kench, or maybe, like, even jungle Tahm Kench, the fact that you can use this much more frequently without running out of mana, and the fact that if you eat an enemy, it goes to a 5-second cooldown. So, in theory, you could eat an enemy champion for 2 seconds. Then you spit them out. I think the cooldown, I'm not sure if the cooldown starts when you spit them out or when you first eat them, but either way, you could eat them again in another 5 seconds. And so, especially with Glacial Augment, like, they're just not going to get away from you, and you can just keep eating them. Now, they did lower the damage a little bit on it, too, or at least they were thinking about that. I guess they didn't end up lowering the damage. They were testing that. But this could be very interesting for Jungle Tahm Kench, because he can, you know, it'll be a much lower cooldown at later ranks on his W, and the lower cost means he can go around and eat a lot of the stuff without running out of mana. So we'll see. So this will probably help jungle and top lane Tahm, which aren't super popular, but could be very oppressive in certain matchups. Now the slow duration on the Q is lowered a little bit. The cooldown is lowered though as well, so you can Tongue Lash again. So once again, could be good for wave clear, could be good for harassing top lane. So we'll see. And I mean, I guess it may not matter if you only eat somebody once in a fight. If that's enough, you know, all you have to do is eat the person that gets Ash arrowed or engaged on by Rakan or whatever. So we'll see. We'll see. I mean, maybe this won't gut him quite as hard as I think, now that I think about it more. We'll see how it goes. It'll be interesting, because, like, he could be very dangerous as jungler, because, you know, he's got that ult that's on a really low cooldown. It's like on a 120-second cooldown. He can just ult in behind people and then just stick to him if he has something like Glacial Augment. It could be pretty oppressive, actually. So, we'll see. We'll see how it goes, but interesting changes there. They're trying to push him to be more aggressive, which I think is a much healthier playstyle. I think that if you're basically giving the enemy a free Quicksilver Sash, for the most part, or you're giving your allies a free Quicksilver Sash, it probably should be on at least a 16-second cooldown, which is what it goes to at max rank. So they're kind of giving him like the Janna treatment. That's what I would think of it. Like his super powerful thing, they're giving it a huge cooldown early on to weaken him, and then they're giving you back a lot of it later, although 6 seconds is still significant. Okay, Taliyah, base movement speed lowered, seismic shove lowered. So your engage is worse early on, or like in the mid game, because you max your Q first, and so this means you'll just have less opportunities to seismic shove people. So if you miss, it's more impactful. That's probably fine. She does need a little bit of a nerf, I think. She's a bit on the strong side still. No longer grants vision is interesting. It's going to make it really annoying to, like, if you have to go through bushes to try to get to people, but this is probably fair. I still think Taliyah will be pretty good, but it's probably fair. This is a huge nerf to Trundle. So he's going from 100 base damage down to 60 on his Q, which is insanely high, or like an insane nerf. 40 base damage loss. Now your AD ratio increases by 20% at max rank, but you know you're gonna have to have 200 AD before that evens out. before you even get to the same amount that you had before. Because it's 20%, you're missing 40, so it takes 200. And then the duration lasts a lot less. So I think there's a huge nerf to Trundle. Trundle does not want to build a lot of damage, I don't think. I mean, he might build like a Hydra. I'm not even sure what he builds these days, honestly. Let me see. Trinity Hydra would be like if you're going super aggressive, but I could see him also building tank stuff, potentially. Yeah, he goes Hydra. I mean, he needs Tiamat, so he can clear a lot faster. It looks like he doesn't go Trinity anymore. It's just pretty much Tiamat into tank. So yeah, it's even more of a nerf than I thought, because the base damage matters the most on champions that don't get anything for their ratios, right? So on like these full tank champions that don't have a lot of AD or AP or whatever, like nerfing the base damage hurts a ton. So yeah, it's going to hurt Trundle quite a lot. I don't think Trundle's that oppressive in solo queue, but I do think that he has a huge presence in pro play, and so that's why they're probably nerfing him. Yeah, 52% win rate's pretty good in solo queue. I don't feel like he's that bad, but I suppose that's fine. So they're basically saying, look, you can pick Trundle, but you're going to do a lot less damage overall. We're letting him keep the utility of his ult and his pillar, but he's going to do a lot less sustained damage, so, and a lot less dueling power. Now, early on, it's not going to matter. It's just like late game sustained damage. So they're just further sort of clarifying that he is a tank. So, and he does steal AD. Don't forget that he does steal AD off of people, and they kept that intact. But it's definitely a pretty significant nerf to his damage. Now, they did nerf Tryndamere's spin, which I think is kind of silly. I'm not a big believer in AP Tryndamere. I know some people have said this champion's like ridiculous and all that stuff. I've seen it in my games. I'm not impressed most of the time. Like, it's okay. He needs a lot of items. You know, he really needs to be able to get to like Nashers plus Lichbane plus like one more item. It is awkward because he builds so much AP but does AD damage. And that's always kind of like strange balance wise to figure out how to moderate that. But they are nerfing his spin cooldown to where it's 2 extra seconds at max rank. I mean, one thing about like the AP build is you can get a lot of CDR off of Nashor's Tooth and a couple of the other AP items that he could get. And that allows him to spin even more. So, you can still build Crit Tryndamere. It'll probably be about the same thing. This is strictly for the AP Tryndamere. So I think it's that was what made it viable, is they like increased the AP ratio or something on his spin, or they lowered the cooldown, or they did something with it. I think that's one of the only things with an AP ratio on it though, right? Yeah, is this spin has a 100% AP ratio. So you could spin and do quite a bit of extra damage there. And then you get the bigger heal. So they're letting you still get the huge heal if you want it. But they're nerfing his mobility a little bit. So I think that's fine. I don't think it necessarily needed the nerf. If you look at like top win rate or whatever. Oops, not that. 51% or whatever. Not even everybody's going to be building AP on him. So once again, I think he's kind of getting singled out because it's a really weird build. I mean, he's like the whatever 40th highest win rate top laner or something. But I guess enough people complained on forums and there were too many all caps videos about it or whatever, so they felt like they had to nerf it. But that's fine. I kind of hate to see stuff like that go because people do get hype even if they're misled about it and they're like, think it's a lot stronger than it is. At least it gets them excited about new and different builds. So I really don't like to see them nerfing out funky stuff unless it's really disrupting a meta, and I don't think it is. So I would have liked to see them leave that alone, but that's fine. Now Wukong is a problem. Now he is not as as hyped up, I don't think, as like AP Trendamere is. But this champion is actually a problem. He's 55% win rate. He's been that way for a really long time. And now he still has a pretty low pick rate, but he is obnoxious because he can just one-shot assassinate somebody with his combo, but then he can also take out an entire team. And if he gets like a Black Cleaver, he shreds the armor off of everybody on a whole team. So he has kind of a bad laning phase, but just like his ability to both assassinate and team fight are just a little too strong. I mean, his numbers are just ludicrous. If we look at the monkey, and a lot of it's because he's an older champion. I think he came around like Season 3 or Season 4. And so he still has like total attack damage, which is something they've been sort of moving out of the game overall because it's just it just scales too hard a lot of the time, especially with lethality, because total attack damage includes your I had this asked on stream the other night, I think by Chef Taliyah or Chef Int or Chef Camille or whatever he's going by these days, the Chef. Bonus attack damage, for those of you that don't know the difference, bonus attack damage is only attack damage that you get from items, runes, outside sources. But total attack damage includes your base attack damage that you get by leveling up. So he gets a free 68, which is really high, base attack damage. I didn't realize it was that high. That's pretty ridiculous. He gets 68 base attack damage. So that calculates with this. So when it says 50% of your AD, that's total. So, you know, when he has 100, you know, midway through the game, he gets an extra 50 damage on it. Where if it was bonus attack damage, then it would only give you for your runes. You wouldn't get anything off of this. And so a lot of his ratios are still total attack damage. Like his ult is total attack damage. His crushing blow is total attack damage. So that's why his numbers are so bonkers. Is because he's that, and a lot more champions used to have this. Almost all champions used to scale with total attack damage, and then Riot figured out that that's just like too high. That the scaling is too much for a lot of champs, and so that's why they've changed it to bonus attack damage most of the time. But Wukong is someone where he still has it for some reason. So, you know, his Q just does so much. Now, this reduces the armor. It's not he does extra damage, like an RE charm or something like that. It's the armor is reduced for everybody. So, if you know, when you crushing blow somebody and your AD carry starts attacking them, so if you do a crushing blow, even on a tank on the front line, it's reducing their armor by 30%, and your AD carry is benefiting from that whenever they auto-attack them, or your Kindred, or whatever does physical damage is benefiting. So it's a huge team-wide buff whenever you land this Q on somebody. It's pretty big single-target damage. I mean, 150 base with 50% total attack damage. It's very easy to have like 300 attack damage, including your base attack damage in like the mid to late game off of 2 items. So it's like 300 base damage and shreds armor and resets an auto attack. And then his, I mean, this is fine. It's like 80% bonus attack damage, which is pretty good. It just randomly increases his attack speed also and has pretty high base damage. But this is the big kicker too. Is like his ult is absolutely insane. 440% of your bonus attack damage. And it's a knock-up. So they're definitely sitting in it for, I think it knocks up for 1 second. I'm not sure the exact timing on it. I feel like it's a 1 second knock-up. But they're definitely sitting in it for at least 1 second. And it's a really long effect radius. It feels like it's a lot more than 162. That might be the radius. I feel like the diameter, like it's a pretty big thing, and you can move and go into other people, as you know, and knock them up. So it's not like everyone has to be clumped up at the beginning to get the knock up. You can move around and still knock other people up, and it just does continual insane damage. So if you just have 200 AD, including your, like, just 100 bonus attack damage from like a couple of items, like, you know, Ghost Blade plus Dust Blade, you know, whatever your runes, you might have 250 total attack damage, so 100 off of your base, and then you know, whatever off of your items, that gets multiplied by 4.4. So, I mean, it's like 2,000 damage. Basically off of 2 items. Like Ghost Blade, Dust Blade, 2,000 damage. AoE to everybody on a 120-second cooldown that also knocks them up for champions like Yasuo, and he just does too much. That's the thing about Wukong. He does too much. So he's kind of a weird pick. He's kind of trash early on, but if he just gets the Duskblade, Ghostblade, he can delete your backline and just CC your whole team and just win. So I think he's just too good. Even though he's a weird oddball pick, I hate him. I hate playing against him. And the fact that he comes up invisible too with Ghostblade, so he's just really hard to stop a lot of times. If he just rolls up invisible out of a bush with like Ghostblade rolling in. Now he is going to get a nerf off of Electrocute and the lethality changes, sudden impact, but I'm glad to see him get a bit more. So they're lowering the Q damage and they're lowering the AD ratio down to 40%. Fair. That's going to make him weaker early on. Actually, they're not. Yeah, they did lower his damage early on from 30 to 10. So that's going to make him a lot weaker in the laning phase. So we'll see. So he still keeps most of his late game power because a lot of that's in his ult, but it is knocking a little bit out of his kit here, so that's probably fine. Zoe, I've said that she needed more nerfs. They're giving her more nerfs. AP Sparkle, they're hitting her ratios, which I think is good. AP Sparkle damage lowered to 20% from 32%. Base damage lowered a decent amount. That's not an insane amount lowered, but the scaling is lowered, which is good. And then the AP ratio on Spell Thief is lowered. I like this. I like this because this is the free invisible type of damage that Zoe deals when she just R's over to you and just auto attacks you after she's cast her W with Spell Thieves, and then just gets that free damage on you. I personally don't mind that much if she hits you with the bubble that you're basically dead if someone doesn't block it. That does have counterplay to it to an extent. People see that you're about to be slept, and they can body block if they need to. And if she's really fed, she does a ton of damage in one-shots. I like that. I'm okay with that. Because it requires skill. You have to hit the bubble, and you have to set up, your Q. And it's risky when you go in. You could get blown up by somebody because they know exactly where you're going to return to. So it makes you really vulnerable to skill shots. So I don't mind that kind of power being on something that has that much setup and risk required to it. It's still really strong, but I think that that's fair. What's not fair about Zoe is mostly her W. The fact that it has no cooldown. You get to pick up all of these summoner spells and not only use the summoner spell, but you also get extra bonus movement speed and this extra damage on her W, which has bonus. It has base damage and an AP ratio that was pretty high. That's just too much. Because in a team fight, people are going to be using 5 different summoners. So you can cast this thing 5 times. It has no mana cost, no cooldown, and just puts out way too much damage. And it triggers her passive. So that's what I don't like, where she can just pick up one of these things, R over to you, auto attack you, and then, ignite you or whatever. And you're going to get you're going to be taking the ignite damage, you're going to be taking the more sparkles damage, the auto attack damage if she has Lichbane, and you're going to be taking the Spell Thieves damage. So she can just hit you for 900 or something without hitting you with a bubble or a Q, just straight up R over auto. So that's what I think is really toxic, the non-skill shot, where she just gets all this free damage. So I'm glad they're changing that and not her Q or her W around, because I think that or her Q or her E around. I think that the W is the problem. So they are lowering her all-in damage, and they're saying, look, if you want to all-in kill somebody unless they're really low, you have to hit them with a Q. So I think that's fair. She's really oppressive. She doesn't have a huge win rate in solo queue. She is kind of hard to play to an extent, but she's got quite a bit of representation in pro play. Now, she's not banned out that much. I mean, I don't know. This might be a little over the top, but I would like to see definitely some more. And she's a champion that's super annoying for people to play against. So, people just hate this champion. And a lot of that is because there's so many different one-shot mechanics that she can do in lane. Okay, so heal is also getting a buff. I think I'm okay with this. This is going to be another buff to Marksman, which is starting to stack up. They're getting a lot of buffs. But the fact that Ignite is so strong, and Ignite pretty naturally counters heal anyways, I think it's safe to lower the cooldown on this. They're also trying to entice some mid laners to take this instead of teleport or barrier. I feel like barrier and teleport just outcompete heal in other positions. So I think this is fair. I think it's fair. I mean, however long, 4 minutes is still quite a while. It will help the AD carries out a little bit. So I think that's fine. Especially given how... I mean, I think the option would be either buff heal or nerf ignite. But I guess they're going to go with keep ignite ridiculously strong, and then you can go ahead and buff heal to compensate. Okay. So now there's going to be much more of an incentive to use your heal earlier before you get that ignite on you, because it's going to be on a lower cooldown. So you're not going to be punished as hard if you have to heal early before they ignite. Okay. Electrocute getting nerfed. Like I talked about earlier, it's going from 220 at the top end to 180, so that's 40 less damage. That's a pretty big deal. And then they're lowering the base ratio from 50 to 40 on the attack damage, and then 5% on the AP, which is probably pretty fair. I feel like the AD champions abuse this a lot more than the AP champs, but I think this is good. But to compensate for that, they are lowering the cooldown from 50 seconds to 25 seconds. So now they are clarifying this as like a laning tool. So it's similar to like Scorch or Aftershock or something like that, where you can do it like once per wave if you time it correctly. So I think that's fair. That adds a bit more pressure in the laning phase. Something else that can compete with like Airy and Comet during the laning phase as far as trades go. And can still be pretty decent later on into the game. Now, someone in chat was saying that Electrocute's never been as strong as Thunderlord's is. I just want to let you all know that's patently false. Like, Electrocute has always been stronger than Thunderlord's, right? So the AD ratio on this has always, you know, the highest it ever was 30% with a 30-second cooldown back in the day. So, like, when it released, it was 20% bonus AD, 10% AP, and you had to have 3 stacks. So hitting an enemy champion with an ability or basic attack on hit marks them for 5 seconds. So it would do 10 to 180 with a 20% bonus ratio. And it was a 30-second cooldown. Whereas if you compare that with Electrocute, before this nerf, Electrocute did 50 to 220, which is way more. And this is the key. It has this 50% bonus attack damage ratio. That's the problem, because that scales so hard. And another thing that's like not really expressed here is this does magic damage, okay? Thunderlord, or Electrocute does physical damage on champions like Talon and Zed, which means lethality works on it. That is a huge, huge difference, okay? So, like, the fact that you can run, like, Duskblade, Ghostblade, or whatever on Talon, and it does extra damage on the Electrocute. So, Electrocute has higher scaling than Thunderlord's, Electrocute has higher base damage, and it counts as physical damage if you want it to, so that lethality applies to it. It's insanely much, much more powerful than Thunderlord's ever was. So even after the nerf, right, now it's going to 25 to 15 based on level, which is very similar to the 25 to 15 that Electrocute is currently. And it is, whatever, it's still going to be 40% bonus AD versus 20% or 30% or whatever. It's still stronger. But I think that this is going to be more fair. It's going to be more similar to what Thunderlord's was, but I still think that it's going to be a bit stronger. This might open it up for other like laning type of champs to get this. So something like a Zyra might like this now. We'll see. They are nerfing Airy a little bit too. But we'll see how it goes. So I think this is interesting. I think more champions, like this hurts assassins, but it does open up other champions that have 3 hits that can trigger this to possibly be a little bit stronger in lane. So like Zyra is the first one that I thought of, but there might be some other ones out there too that can do like little 3-hit combos to proc Electrocute more often in the laning phase. So I mean, even something like Nami or Sona could do that. The problem is the rest of the tree I don't think is going to be as good as sorcery. We'll have to see. I'll do a whole video on it when it comes out. But I feel like it's not going to be the tree's not going to be as good as sorcery, especially since they're nerfing cheap shot by a lot. So like if they didn't nerf cheap shot, someone like Nami could actually put her E on her and attack once and then wave somebody so that you got the cheap shot proc. And then damage, yeah. So that you would get the cheap shot proc, and then auto attacking them one more time would trigger electrocute, and that could be really, really strong in the laning phase. But I think they're nerfing cheap shot, probably because of that, because this is going to open it up to a wider variety of champions that could use electrocute. I don't know if they need to nerf it that much though. I don't think almost nobody takes cheap shot. Pretty much everybody takes sudden impact. So this tree here is just pretty. It got a lot worse. This second tree, like. So they're lowering the lethality from 10 to 7, and they're lowering the magic pen from 8 to 16. I guess that's fine. It's going to hit assassins a little bit more, you know, in addition to electrocute. And like I said, I don't think a lot of them use cheap shot. Maybe there are some probably that do, but I think many, many, many more assassins go sudden impact instead of cheap shot. So I would have liked to have seen maybe cheap shot not nerfed here so that it could compete with sudden impact in some cases. But either way, you know, you might be able to on someone like a Nami if you want to try electrocute, or on a Zyra you could do taste of blood, and then like ultimate hunter or something like that. I'm not sure. We'll see. It's probably not going to be as good as Airy Mana Flow, but we'll see. So they are nerfing Airy here, and 5 damage is quite a bit early on. I mean, Airy's really, really strong. So this is going to be a nerf to Fiddlesticks as well, because Fiddlesticks really abuses that Airy buff, because he pretty much procs it on cooldown, you know, every single time he presses an E. So this is going to be a nerf to champions like Fiddlesticks, Nami, Sona. A lot of these early game aggressive champions are going to get nerfed. Now, they are increasing the shield at early levels, but I don't think that's going to matter, because there aren't many champions that just sit there and will just, like, cast shields a lot. Yeah, I don't think so. Maybe if it was, like, later on in the game, you got a bit more shield, it might compensate for it, but 5 damage matters, you know? If you end up hitting people with, like, 3 times per minute with this, that's 15 damage, and then over the course of like 3 minutes, that's 45 more damage. Now, that doesn't account for magic resist and stuff like that, but this does add up. So, do I think this is going to make Airy like unplayable? No, I still think it's going to be strong, but there will be other things to compete with it, because I think Airy is one of the best runes in the game. So yeah, I think it'll definitely hurt it a little bit. Now, this right here, this celerity is interesting. This is going to hit champions that get Nimbus Cloak primarily, or that get a lot of speed to get the extra the extra damage in there. So they're nerfing it from 16 down to like 9.6. I don't know. I don't think it needs that many nerfs, but like that's a lot. We'll see. And then Scorch is getting the electrocute treatment, where if you proc it, you know, a lot in lane, it'll still do some decently steady damage, but it's going to do half as much for half the cooldown. So this is a pretty hardcore nerf to sorcery. I mean, that's 3 runes that are almost on every sorcery champion, right? Airy, Celerity, and Scorch are all getting nerfed, and then electrocute for the all-in, you know, 2 trees are getting nerfed. So this means that, and I'm going to go and wrap this up, so I don't want this to be too long. It's already been a lot longer than I thought it would be, but this means that, like, the early game champions have they're going to have a lot better time. So champions like Vayne, champions like Twitch that aren't very good in the early game, champions like Janna. Now, Janna's still going to get Airy, probably. I'd have to look at all the options. But she'll likely still get Airy. But she doesn't care, like, if Airy does less damage. Like, yeah, she procs it some in lane, but she's not going to abuse it as much as Sona, Nami, or her other competition down there. She doesn't care about Scorch. She could just as easily get Gathering Storm and be okay with that. Celerity, it's fine. She can just get Transcendence or something like that. So I think that this will help out a lot of the champs, especially in the bot lane, that struggle in the early game. against a lot of poke and aggression, so that's good. They had tested a Yasuo nerf, they took it, or a Yasuo buff, they took it off. They thought that Yasuo got hit really hard by the changes to Infinity Edge. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but they were thinking about giving his ult like an extra 100% bonus attack damage, so going from 150 to 250, but they took that off. There's been a couple other things that they've toyed with, they also taken off. But this is the PBE as it stands right now. Overall, I do think the changes are pretty good. I think it's a bit excessive on some of these champions, but, you know, some of them are a bit on the strong side, so I'm okay with that. And overall, nerfing this damage, I think it might be a little over the top on the sorcery tree. Sorcery will still probably be strong, but a lot of people have been complaining there's too much damage in the game right now. It's like, well, this is definitely going to bring some tanks back in, especially with the electrocute nerfs. I think that's the most important one. But like the airy stuff for a lot of the popular enchanters that are aggressive bot lane is definitely something. So they are nerfing. Whoa, did they change the Recon? Or did I just skip it? Because they had Recon getting nerfed on here, but I don't see him anymore. Oh, they did. Okay, I just glossed over that. This is a pretty significant nerf to Recon. You know, losing 30 health and then base armor going down by 3 is quite a lot. However, the fact that people won't be able to harass him as easily with Airy and Scorch in the laning phase, that does help out quite a bit. So, we'll see. We'll see. I think the biggest winner is Janna. I think that the entire meta is lining up for Janna once again. You know, she's going to have a lot less people harassing her. She can change her build around and be fine, even if she doesn't get airy. I think she probably will, but she doesn't care a lot about this stuff. Anytime the damage starts getting lowered and you need to peel hyper carries that are scaling, because this also all benefits hyper carries. Twitch, Vayne, like I mentioned before, are all going to love it, that people can't harass them as early. Janna's going to love it. Then they're just going to scale right into the late game. So, we'll see how it goes. But I'm okay with that. I love playing Janna. I think Janna's great, but I know some people might be mad about Janna coming back into the meta if this happens, but we'll see. But anyways, that's going to be it. Thank you very much. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.